welcome to episode 6 of the Bithell Games Podcast. I am Alexander Slinsky.
And I'm Mike Bithell.
Each week we talk about games, what it's like to make games, and the random stuff we don't generally find time to talk about because we are playing and or making games. We also try to have guests regularly on the show. We do not have one this week, but we will have one very, very soon. And if you are a subscriber, an upscriber? Wow, I'm just shortening subscriber now.
That can be our new startup name.
Upscriber.
It's a great tool that you use. I don't know what it's for, but to be honest, you don't need to as long as you've got a cool name.
Yeah, and we'll change the I to a Y.
Done.
And no ER, just an R.
Let's just sell this already. I think let's find a buyer.
Trademark. just trademark that. What does it do?
No, this is the thing. It synergizes.
So if you're an upscriber, no E with a Y, to the show on YouTube, check out the series of level design videos Mike did with some real level designers.
I like that. Mike and some real level designers. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I saw it. I liked it.
Good job. And good feedback, too, which was nice.
They were loads of fun to do. It was nice just to have an excuse to hang out with Sam and Hamish again.
Because Sam is doing the Coda stuff as well.
He has been, yep. And Hamish is off working on, oh gosh, it's embarrassing, I've forgotten the name. The game from the Banjo-Kazooie guys, they successfully kickstarted it. Can't remember what it's called, but the new project that they're working on, he's gone and work as a level designer there, which makes me much more excited for that game, actually. I'm really excited for it now, because he's great.
And hopefully by next week you'll remember what the name of the game is.
I'm incredibly embarrassed. It's something that sounds a bit Banjo-Kazooie. I'm going to Google it now, because I'm embarrassed.
So while you Google that, this week we're not going to talk about the games we've been playing, because we have a ton of reader mail from folks, and so we're gonna hit a couple of those. We're not gonna hit all of them. Thank you to everyone that has sent something in so far. There are more than the ones we are getting to this week. But before we get there, what's going on at the studio?
Well, first of all, ukulele. That's the name of the game.
Okay.
Because people are yelling it at their pods of choice. What's going on in the studio? Lots. Well, you've been working.
Yes.
I've been on holiday. I went on a secret holiday to Disney World, which was fun. I kind of didn't tell anyone or mention it on Twitter or anything, which was nice because I just got to go and disappear. But I did still get someone tweeting at me going, "Did I just see you at Disney World?"
I saw that. So this guy that looked like Mike Bithell here at Disney World, and it was him, by the way. If you're listening to the show,
yeah, that was me. That was me. You should have said hello. I'd have said hello back, and then been a little bit creeped out because I can't even go to Disney World. But that was fun. So Disney World was fun. And then I've come back and done a little bit, but to be honest, I'm mainly just kind of catching up. Whereas you have been crazy busy.
Yeah, so along with a ton of business stuff that has been going on, which we will hopefully be able to start talking about in the next few months, the big thing that happened is DICE. Now, we try to balance on this show, make this show balanced for developers in the industry and folks who are interested in the industry. And I think DICE is something neither side talks about that much until they hit a certain level.
So that's it. I mean, I've never been... And it's kind of, it is a very, is it fair to say it's a very suity event? It's a very executives and, which I guess I am an executive, but I don't think of myself as an executive. It's that level, isn't it? It's like super high, big meetings between the big boys. So I've never been to it.
So what's interesting is that, yes, years ago, I would have said it is only the suits that go to DICE. And certainly since the independent games movement has come on the scene, they used to have like student projects there as well. So you actually did see a lot of student developers. And over the last several years, many independent developers as well. It is, I would certainly say, a full ticket to DICE is cost prohibitive. Even for us, but there are options around that. Many people actually just show up as long as you get the flight and the hotel and you're sort of in the complex. Like no one actually hangs out and talks like in a in a sort of bordered off area. Almost everyone is hanging out at a specific bar in the casino and chilling and talking there. And then there's also an awards show, and it is now called the Dice Awards, which is the whole thing is run by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, and this awards show is peer reviewed, and so this year Fallout 4 won Game of the Year.
Okay.
I'm happy that Witcher won several games as well. Several awards as well. And I did find there's like a couple categories that you're kind of like, So for example, Arrowhead Games had Helldivers up for a couple awards. So Helldivers won for Best Handheld Game. Sure. Yeah,
Did it
sure.
come out, or was it on Vita?
I guess so.
Okay.
Yeah. Or handheld game means a game that you play with your hands. I have no idea. But Helldivers is like, Helldivers is a really, really good game.
It's a great game, yeah.
It's just funny the category that it kind of won in. And the interesting part currently with DICE is that we get to certainly talk to our peers who are in independent games, have their own studios. And what's really interesting now is because there is such a geographic diversity in games, there are challenges that represent themselves, not only in terms of talent, but in terms of running a studio. So, for example, it was a very interesting conversation between having Nathan Vella to my right, who runs Cappy Games, who is based in Canada, and Canada has numerous incentives that help development studios and publishers. Ubisoft is massive in Canada, and help them along. And then, to my left, I have Amir from Supergiant Games, who is based in San Francisco. And he's just like, that is a challenging place to not in terms of employment, because there is absolutely plenty of talent in San Francisco,
but notoriously expensive.
Notoriously expensive. Yeah. Currently, you are based in London,
which would be a very foolish place to
which is just
to make
a silly place to make games.
Oh.
But again, it's very much like San Francisco, where you do have an enormous amount of talent.
True.
But you simply cannot. We just can't hire sort of willy-nilly and make a studio of 20 people and not be challenged with having essentially a £3 million bill every single year.
This is what I have to explain to people with London, is that I have to pay effectively on a personal level. I'm paying 3 times, because I'm paying for more. My rent's higher in London. The office rent is higher in London. And then everyone who works for me, their rent is higher. So therefore, of course, they want a fair wage that will cover them to live in a nice, comfortable area, in a nice, comfortable home. So it's piling up when you live in a major city of just cost after cost after cost, and it all goes back to the business, which is scary.
Yeah, so it was very interesting, because we've certainly openly talked about setting up an official sort of studio space someplace. And at DICE, there were numerous people who, congratulations, here you guys are, sort of setting up your own place. Are you really going to stay in the UK? And it's like, yeah, no, we're going to stay in the UK and make it work. And they're like, yeah, but are you sure? Are you sure you want to do that? Because, for example, depending on the province in Canada, you can get between 30 and 50% back on everything that you spend. And it's weird, because the first thing that dear listener might be thinking is just like, wow, that's a lot of tax incentives for a company. Now, the sort of argument for that is A, you're a jobs creator, and B, something like Ubisoft, which just they had a new building in this not great area, And now that the building is there, people go there every single day for work, and there are like 4 beautiful restaurants. There are 2 amazing cafes. There's like all this like, life that's going on there. Those employees are putting way more money into the economy than Ubisoft is getting back or saving, or however you want to put that when you are on the political spectrum. But
the problem is, Alexander, I have a lot of Lego, and the costs involved in transporting that Lego to Canada are it's not worth thinking about, so we're going to have to stay in the UK.
Okay. Have you considered Bulgaria?
Well, I think one thing that we all benefit from nowadays is that because web communication is so brilliant now, we can work remotely. So there's no reason that we can't have members of the team all over the place. I mean, this podcast right now, we're recording, you're in Boston, I'm in London, and, we make it work with that distance, so kind of anything else is fine as well, you know what I mean? Part of the desire to get into a shared studio space is, I think, on a creative level, it's just great to be in a room with people. But that doesn't mean that we can't still use remote stuff where it makes sense. So I think we're in an incredibly luxurious position now. And you compare this to, like, even 5 years ago, just having, Skype and all the other tools that we use every day, it just all becomes very, very straightforward, which is great.
Yeah. So DICE is a great meeting of you've got your massive AAA executives there. You've got your independent games folks who are from obviously like across the world and across a spectrum of different levels. I mean, there are independent developers that I met that are working on $20 million projects, and I'm just like, blows my mind. It's just like, how, why, how, okay. I mean, awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, we're not there yet. we're not there yet. It'll be nice when we're there, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very cool event. It's one that not too many folks talk about. But next up in the sort of calendar is going to be GDC, and GDC is very. If DICE is any indication, GDC is going to be a VR fest.
Yep.
Just so much, all the VRs.
All the VRs. There's a lot of people lining up to make big announcements there. A lot of developers, have been playing with the tools. We have, I've not made any secret of that, but my living room has, like, right now, at least, 3 VR headsets just strewn in the living room from doing various stuff. Like, I think everyone's very excited, and that's great. So yeah, I'm assuming that that's just going to dominate the conversation at GDC. I think the other thing is it's very exciting because it's a new space, and I think we haven't really had a new. Well, it's been a while since a new console. We haven't got any new big kind of platforms or stores. So I think a lot of people are looking at VR as kind of the next Wild West, right? The next space that is going to be empty and kind of that you can do really interesting things in.
Well, it was interesting. President of Nintendo of America, Reggie Fils-Aimé, was at DICE this year doing the honorary. I don't know what you call it. Eulogy. It's not a eulogy.
It's not a eulogy.
He was saying thank you to Satoru Iwata, who passed this year.
Oh right. Okay.
For their friendship and all of those elements. But it was certainly interesting looking at all the folks around him afterwards, all the different developers trying to get any information they could get about Nintendo's new console. So it was interesting seeing all these developers around Reggie trying to get whatever information they could about the new Nintendo console. And it's great because it's absolutely like fans just gathering around him asking whatever. So, is it What is it? Is it handheld? Is it because there's all these different ways that Nintendo could go, and you can never really say which direction Nintendo is going to go. So we have no idea. Like, is it a DS that plugs into a dock and so it's a console on its own? Is it something VR related? We have no idea. We have no clue. So that was fun. That was fun watching Reggie trying to avoid
The problem Reggie must have at those things is he's a very easy man to see because he's an incredibly tall fella.
Yeah.
And you can't miss him. So in a crowd, he's going to attract attention.
So now we shift into reader mail, one of many reader mails, because that is going to be the remainder of this show.
I like this bit because I have no idea what this is ever. Like, you always tell me, there's 2 or 3 emails and we're going to go through them, but I have no idea what's coming up, which makes this bit exciting.
So, gentlemen, thanks for the informative podcast. It has been interesting hearing about the business considerations of your industry. Do you have you considered adapting board games or card game mechanics into your games? What are some of your favorite game mechanics? And Mike, do you have any formal education in game theory, or does it just come naturally? Cheers, best, Grant.
Okay.
So let's there's 3 different questions in there. So let's kick off with the Mike. Do you have any formal education in games or game theory, or does it come naturally?
I do. Can I just be pretentious for a moment?
Okay.
I don't like the phrase game theory because game theory is a mathematician's term. It used to refer to like the work of people like John Nash. He was Russell Crowe in the movie. This kind of the idea of
which movie? Beautiful Mind?
Beautiful Mind, yeah.
Okay. So I wasn't sure if you were talking like Les Mis or something.
In Gladiator, game theory was invented in the Roman time. No. Game theory. So game theory can kind of be confusing. Anyway, that's just me complaining. Fun aside, by the way, I once moaned about this publicly on Twitter, like, "Oh, bloomin' game theory is the wrong term. John Nash is irrelevant to video games," or something like that, right? Forgetting that one of my bosses at the time was called John Nash, which got me in a lot of trouble. Anyway, side note. If you're out there, John, I'm sorry. It was a misunderstanding. But no, in terms of my formal education, I do have a degree in game design. That was Bachelor of the Arts. I think it's with honours. I can't remember, to be honest with you. Which I did. I was one of the first in one of the first courses in the UK to do that. So I would have graduated, I think, about 8 years ago now. So I do, but to be honest, people often ask me, would you recommend a degree or any kind of, would you recommend formal education? It's very hard because obviously you always think that whatever path you took was brilliant and wonderful and everyone should do it. But I honestly do think video game development is one of those things where you can just as straightforwardly move into it without doing any kind of formal qualification. I think there's a lot of arguments for doing something different. Some of the best game designers I know have qualifications in completely different fields, but they bring that knowledge and that experience. And I think we've talked about it on the podcast before, the kind of having that breadth of experience can be really interesting. I have a degree in Halo, and that means that, I have the same, kinds of areas of interest as other people. And fortunately I have interests outside of games, but I don't have qualifications outside of games. It also means that, had the game development thing not worked out, then I would have been laughed out of every job interview I ended up going for. So it's a weird one. I do have that. It's very useful. I think honestly, the most I can say for university degrees is they give you 3 years to experiment. They give you a bit of a buffer. You're there. Yes, you're accruing a lot of student debt, but you've made that decision and you have basically some time to kind of work out what you want to do with your life, who you want to be. It's a nice buffer between childhood and adulthood that I think is great as a life experience. A very expensive, increasingly expensive life experience, but one that, I think is important. I met my girlfriend there as well, so obviously that gives me a bias.
So do you or have you considered adapting board card game mechanics into your games? I will take this one.
Go for it.
I would say, particularly for Coda, we are viewing it in a very... mechanics seems weird here, but we are certainly looking at it from a more board gamey angle than I would say Volume itself was, because of some of the things that we are doing with the board in Coda. And I believe that will... I don't want to say what we're doing is going to influence the board games that do end up in VR, but there's some interesting stuff going on there.
There's certainly some aesthetic stuff and some I think that's the interesting thing about VR is it creates this tactility. Is that a word? Makes things tactile, makes things feel like they're physically present, which means you do start to think in terms of like designing objects. But in terms of like board game and card game mechanics, I'll definitely say that they play into my thinking. I'm trying to think if Volume has anything I've directly kind of stolen from card games. It's probably got something tucked away. Definitely in terms of balancing, I think a lot about card games and kind of how those are structured. You're really into board games, aren't you? I play them semi-regularly with a group of friends, but I see you post photos up a lot. Do you have like a regular gaming night kind of
Yes,
setup?
I do.
Yeah.
I play board games pretty consistently, and I find what League of Geeks did with Armello incredibly interesting, and sort of a great test case of what does a video game board game look like? The same way I would look at Hearthstone. So, Magic the Gathering, for example, it's a card game. And if you put it into even a video game space, it's a card game that's on your screen. Whereas Hearthstone is a video game that uses card game mechanics. There are things that Hearthstone does that you just simply can't do, or there's too much math going on for someone to be bothering with that. So the same thing goes for Armello. I think Armello has... it is a video game that has a board game aesthetic to it and has board game things going on, but it is definitely a video game. And yeah, so I mean, in terms of, have we considered them? Yeah, sure, we've considered them. There's a couple ideas bouncing around.
I'd say there's some stuff. Yeah, I think there's some stuff in the future that kind of very directly kind of pulls on that world. Because I've become I kind of almost not forced myself, but made a concerted decision to get into physical games, because I was a video gamer and very passionate video gamer for years and years and years, and then I just kept having conversations with game designers where they were referencing all these mechanics and ideas that I had no idea about, because there were things in board games and card games. So yeah, I have a few mates, a lot of game designers actually, and we basically just try everything once. We're not as... I don't think it's maybe once a month, once every couple of weeks we'll gather and play stuff. And it just means that we're getting some experience of these systems. But there's definitely stuff that I can see going into kind of the next things we're making, where I'm fully aware that I'm absolutely stealing things from the games that I've enjoyed in that process.
Well, there's certainly games that are out there right now that are lifting heavily from this emergence of board games and card games being part of the larger dialogue. I mean, the number of games now that have burn cards is just like, yep, that's totally, a board game mechanic, where you have cards that you need to play, and yeah, there's plenty of stuff going on. And
tied to that, resurgence in strategy as well on PC in particular. Like there's you can map a lot of, especially in indie games, like what, as things become achievable, or not cheap, but like, achievable for a smaller project, you tend to see them, propagate. And one of the things that Unity, for example, did a couple of years ago was massively improve and speed up the way GUI is produced. Before that, making a Unity game, and
that's graphics UI,
graphical user interface, graphical user interface. So hard, and which is heads-up display, all the graphic designy bits around the edge of the screen when you're playing a game, and that stuff became much easier to do in Unity about 2 years ago. And I know as a developer, with Thomas Was Alone, and Thomas Was Alone obviously very minimalist, but has very minimalist menus, and part of that was because it was really hard to make good UI, user interface, for those in that engine, basically back then. So I think a lot of the resurgence of kind of showing lots of stuff going on the user interface, lots of cards, lots of graphics, is because the tools have now made that achievable. And it's this weird arms race with engines. Way back when it used to be that you had to, there was the new graphics stuff, the new stuff was becoming technically possible, which was driving, game development. I forget who the great thinker was, but there was Oh, who was it? It might be a Steve Jobs quote, but there's a quote that is basically that technology drives and inspires art, and it's true. The kind of what's possible. It used to be where something was technically possible, but now we're seeing the second wave, which is it's technically possible and achievable on a small scale project. And I think one of the things we saw a couple of years ago was UI becoming very, very achievable, which I think will have led to some of the stuff you're talking about. And now we're seeing things like procedural generation becoming more straightforward, which means that you're going to see a lot of indie games that use that stuff. So it's fun watching those trends play out. VR is another one that's becoming incredibly accessible for smaller teams.
Hey guys, I just finished the first early access episode of the show. I loved it. I just had a quick question about shortcuts, air quotes, game developers take. Mike mentioned some of the game development shortcuts currently in use that would not apply to VR games. I really love games that have developer commentary or allow you to look around corners you're not supposed to. I'm a big fan of games like The Beginner's Guide. As a result, I'd love to see a VR game's take on current game development shortcuts. When do you guys think we may see that kind of game? Do you think that VR needs to mature on its own before taking on that kind of challenge? Thanks, JT.
That's really interesting.
I'm gonna go with we are still in a state where the average person has not even put a VR headset on their face yet. It is certainly one of the things that game developers are challenging themselves with right now, because many of us have had either, a half dozen experiences, or they are just around the studio, or they're in the home, and you're messing around with it. You're seeing this progression that's happening, but we still have to keep in mind the average person has not put one of these things on their face yet, and certainly something like a PlayStation VR will likely have a very good onboarding process, because they are coming from that place of the average person has not put this thing on their face yet. Here's, what we have to do. It was I was playing Epic Games has a new thing called Bullet Train, which was it's a first-person shooter VR experience, and you're holding two controllers in your hands, and you're grabbing rockets out of the air, and you're throwing them back. Like, it's incredible. And for me, the grabbing things out of the air and throwing it back, all of that was intuitive. The part that was super messy was when, and this is almost every VR presentation to date, you have two people in the room, like you're the third person. One of them will get the game ready while the other one puts the thing on your head. And they say, does that feel comfortable? And you'll turn around and be like, yeah, it feels comfortable. But you find yourself doing a lot of adjustment on that, like, can you make it a little tighter? Because if your face isn't the exact sort of distance from the screen, it looks out of focus, even if you have perfect vision. And so you do a lot of futzing about, and we're not past that futzing about stage, and there's still so many lessons to learn. So that would be my take, is that something like the Beginner's Guide or a Stanley Parable of VR, where it's a, what do we call it? That's a meta discussion, right? Well,
that's the interesting thing, is basically those are postmodern games, which they require some. Davies, I don't want to belittle Davies' work. I love Davey and I love those games, but like, they are reactive. They are mocking in a very wise and clever way. They are mocking something that exists, or they're playing with tropes that you would expect. So in order for that to sort of happen on VR, you need to have some tropes. You have to have, VR has to get out there and become normal.
Because the Beginner's Guide is about a game developer losing his mind, right? It's about
it's exploring, and that's where so there's a few things I want to say. One is, I think the futzing stuff is ending. Like, I definitely, with the latest iteration of PlayStation VR, and especially with the latest version of the Valve kit, things are becoming more straightforward in a way that's very exciting. Okay. And I think the PlayStation VR There are adjustment is easy. I'll put it that way because I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say, and also the onboarding experience. I've had that.
It's not finalized yet.
No, but it's getting really good. The onboarding experience made me smile. I did, with the thing that happens when you first plug in the PlayStation VR. It's now very clever and very good. But yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of the shortcuts, yes, the shortcuts don't work. A lot of the kind of the cheats you do in game dev. So I don't know, things like we've talked about particle effects in VR a lot, which is this idea that a lot of particle effects use a process called billboarding, which is where they'll draw a 2D object and it's got no 3D rotation to it. It's effectively always facing you. It's how the baddies look in a Doom game that they're basically 2D drawings, and that's
your trees that are just two intersection, like a four.
That's not billboarding, but it's a similar idea. And when something explodes in Just Cause, what you're effectively seeing is very clever overlapping of 2D images. But means when you go on VR with that, you immediately see the illusion. And the idea of a VR game which actively showcases that stuff actually really appeals to me. Like the idea of going in and going, okay, this is why, doing a VR behind the scenes of how games used to be before VR with demonstrations of that stuff sounds really interesting. I kind of want to steal that idea, but I think it would be a weird experiment that would be very odd to play with. But no, I think in order to do those kind of games, I feel that VR needs to bed in and needs to become boringly normal, because I think that's what Stanley Parable and Beginner's Guide are reactions to, is first-person games are the primary mode. I guess they're being overtaken a little bit now by the open world genre, but first person is a system so therefore now you can play with it and warp it and distort it and play with your expectations. VR, no one has any expectations of it yet, except that people think it's going to be a holodeck or the Matrix. But then you can't really play with those suppositions. But what will happen is, as if VR takes off in the way that we're all kind of hoping it does, in 5 years' time, when VR is just the boring way that you play your bloody video games, and oh man, can you remember the good old days where we had screens? If we get to that stage, that's where I can imagine some really clever stuff. There are some witty VR demos. There's some people doing VR living rooms where you can play a video game on a virtual TV. So it's exactly the same experience you would have. It's kind of charming and funny, but at the same time, because the technology's new, it's not really rebelling against anything because you don't have that expectation of what VR means and is.
I also think we haven't seen the rebellion yet against the things that we are not supposed to do. So, for example, a true horror game, this is sort of a standard at this point, that a VR experience is not allowed to have your Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street horror experience. You are not allowed to have Until Dawn in VR, because it is too real. It is too real. It is too intense.
But that's where things are going to get really exciting, right? The example I like, which I've heard from some people, is traditional action games. So your Tomb Raider or Uncharted is horrible in VR because you get terrified because you're literally jumping across abysses, and it's a terrifying experience for the average human being.
Abyssi?
Abysses.
Abysses.
Abyss. I don't know. But yeah, so yeah. And horror is one that's really funny, because I've talked to VR guys who are working on horror stuff, and they're terrified because they're creating experiences that are genuinely overwhelming, and that's the point of horror. And you have to remember, it's not a true story, is it? But the apocryphal tale of the first movie where the train comes into the station and people were leaping out of the way, that's the stage we're at with VR, where people are going to believe it. Again, in 5 years, when VR and the idea of existing in VR environments is just something that we're all used to, that's when postmodernism needs modernism to exist beforehand.
I would also note there is a a repeat of history coming that no one is, I don't think, prepared for yet, is for us to have that Jack Thompson attack on video games happen again when VR starts getting too real.
You mean with like violence and like murder simulators, quote unquote? Yeah.
Yep. We will go through it again because enough time will have. Because by the time that narrative starts, it'll have been about 15 years since the last time we went through it. And yes, video games are now protected First Amendment. The Supreme Court has ruled on this, but that doesn't mean that the story can't start again. And it's the perfect time because just enough distance has occurred that an entire generation will not know who Jack Thompson is, will not know what hot coffee is, will not know all of these things, because we see it constantly in the industry now. There are stories that pop up right now that we went through 3 years ago. Like that's how fast this industry moves, that there's just these narratives of like, oh, isn't this a terrible thing? It's like, wait, we just did this. Like, and it wasn't even that long ago. It was just like 4 years ago, but here we are again. But this murder simulator, this Killerspiel thing, that is going to come back.
And also internationally, like, as much as you guys would love it, the Supreme Court does not hold jurisdiction outside of America. So like, and as we see these emerging markets, like, this is going to be, is this stuff going to blow up in, these new spaces we're seeing? China, obviously, there's lots of cultural stuff going on there that I'm massively underqualified to comment on. But like, nearer, things like Russia, like, we're seeing it's a massive PC community in Russia now. This VR technology going in there is going to be interesting because they've not kind of, as to my knowledge at least, they weren't involved the last time around with this stuff. So it's going to be super interesting.
Yeah, because when we're talking about this, we're not noting China or Russia in a pejorative way. We are noting it in a way that it just simply didn't go through that the last time around.
Yeah, or it wasn't the focus. Obviously, they had PlayStation 2s, but like didn't seem to culturally cross over to that extent. When I think of, and again, I might be being massively naive here, but when I think of like hot coffee, that is effectively an American.
That is such an American thing.
An American thing, obviously, because it's a British game. It played over here as well. But I assume that it didn't spread.
You even made a BBC movie about it.
Oh my goodness. Have you watched that yet?
I have not.
I the most fun evening in a long time, just sat watching that with buddies or acquaintances who worked at Rockstar at that time, just like screaming into the social media abyss. Oh, it was a good evening.
What was that movie called? It starred Harry Potter, Mr. Daniel Radcliffe.
It wasn't Game Change. Was it Game Changers? I think Game Changers might have been like the season, because it was part of like a bunch of different kind of video game themed kind of content on the BBC.
I keep waiting for them to bring it over here, because there's just like scenes that to us, like there are just scenes that get talked about in that movie that's like, we're gonna need a new engine for this. It's like the next scene is...
Yeah, well, that's how they come up with Ping Pong, is they've built a new engine that allows for realistic animation, and you're just like, what does that even... Does that, because before, we couldn't really animate in the engine. It's like, what? I don't like any. Yeah, it was fantastic, and just the way it depicts it felt like someone who wanted to make Social Network and assumed that, like, I assume Social Network is equally nonsensical, but I don't work in the startup web development world, so I don't see all of that. So it seems like it has the air of authenticity to me. Whereas to this, it's just like, it was, things like GTA 3 being made by like 20 people, and you're just like, no, there were definitely hundreds of people in that room. It wasn't just like some guys eating pizza and making GTA 3. It was like, that was a significant answer. Anyway, but it was funny.
It's funny. Like they make it seem like GTA was like Halt and Catch Fire, like 1983
exactly,
Activision, where it's like four really like hardcore sort of folks. It's like,
which is there in the history of that company, but like by the time the movie takes place, like it was a much more establishing. But to be fair, I'm sure this is how lawyers feel when they watch legal dramas, or cops feel when they watch procedurals. Like, I'm sure, it's only because I work in that industry that I can see the silliness of it. But the best thing that they keep doing in that, and I was being a bit pretentious about terms earlier, but they do they're constantly referring to it as the gaming industry, To which any game dev's like, that's casinos.
Yeah.
We're in the game industry, not the gaming industry.
Or the games industry.
Or the games industry, yeah.
But it's definitely not gaming. Gaming is...
It's definitely not gaming, yeah. And just stuff like that, where it's like, this feels... And I know they had, some buddies consulted on it. Like, I know they had, professionals who would have spotted that stuff. So I don't know what happened in the development of that show, but just like, the... stuff like that, where it's just like it sounds like there's a Mitchell and Webb sketch about two writers who know nothing about medicine, who make an ER ripoff, and they've got doctors talking about they need to get the right medicine because that's the medicine that makes people sick, so they need the better medicine and all this stuff. And it's just, it feels like that. It feels like kind of that they're tourists. They don't really understand the industry they're talking about. Anyway, that's a massive tangent we've gone off on there.
So here's the last reader mail of the day, but certainly not the last reader mail that we have in the stable.
We can use those on the quieter weeks.
So hey, Mike and Alex, I'm planning on making the jump to full-time indie developer soon, and I had a question about when to open a studio. I ask this because as of now, I would like to focus on small mobile games as they are easier for me to create given my time, scope, and funding. I've already released games using just my name. However, I would like to expand into making PC and console games one day. So, do I start the studio now and continue making mobile games with plans of expanding into other platforms, or continue releasing games under my name until I'm able to grow into a team? I don't want to be the weird mobile game developer that is all of a sudden making PC games. I feel like people unfairly judge those developers sometimes. But then again, if the games are fun and well made, it shouldn't matter. Appreciate any input. Love the podcast. Thanks, Jordan. There's a couple things to unpackage here.
Yeah.
So we are certainly struggling with this exact kind of idea at the moment. Where do we go from here? Do we get a bunch of funding, go big, or do we use the resources that we have and make a fairly decent sized game? But for him, I think he's in a similar-ish position to where you were with Thomas, and certainly before Volume. And in my thinking, and feel free to correct
me. I have lots of opinions. I'm just going to wait till you finish before I...
I complimented you on this the other night, which was Volume was, you had about 40-something people on it, but it was you taking things from all of those different 40 people and putting it all together in a piece, which is much different than Thomas, where it was you did Thomas and there were elements that you elevated using help from other folks, whereas Volume was certainly a collaboration of many, many different people coming together. Yeah. So already those two projects have very different development styles to them. So I want to put that one out there before you start talking about it, because people may think that the development of Thomas is the same as the development of Volume, and that is not accurate.
Well, I think a lot of people think as well that Volume was made in a traditional kind of studio environment with a bunch of us sat at desks doing stuff, and like you say, Volume was me kind of coding kind of the core gameplay stuff, and then just bringing in a lot of very talented people to contribute and work on cool different parts of the game, and then feed their stuff into the game, and take their feedback on the stuff I was doing and kind of change that. So it was much more me at the center of lots of people, in a way that is not necessarily how I want to make games in the future. I kind of want to go more into the studio thing. I think the big question I have here it's Jordan, right? Is the name? With Jordan, I'm wondering where you're at, Jordan, in terms of the process, because if you're known, if your games are kind of have become names that are recognized, or they're big mobile mega hits, then I shouldn't be giving you advice, basically. Like, you should just go and find an Alexander of your own and, like, start building a business. What I would say, though, is if you're not at that point, if you've made some games and they've been well received, but, like, you've not quite hit that notoriety yet, then I wouldn't worry about your name. I wouldn't worry about, people reacting badly to you because you're a quote-unquote mobile developer. Because, to be honest, they won't know who you are. And
they won't know who you are until they know who you are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That is a very classic thing we see in the games industry. Mike worked on 7 projects before Thomas comes along. Alexander Bruce, another good example of someone. Why am I forgetting his game right now? Oh no, Antichamber. But he had worked on that for a long time before it made its way out there. He actually has a really good GDC talk about it, which I think is available online. You can go ahead and search that. But no one knows who you are until they know who you are.
Yeah, so I wouldn't worry. I mean, I think honestly, the backlash to mobile games on PC is when it feels unfair to a PC audience. I think we could have a debate. I'm sure this would be a good topic for us to talk over of whether this is a fair criticism. But the ones I hear most are when a game looks like it's been made for a touch screen and doesn't feel right on a mouse and keyboard or a controller, which I think is absolutely fair enough if people feel that something's been rushed out. Also things like, very quickly remove free-to-play systems or stuff that doesn't make sense unless you think of it in the context of a mobile game. You see these games come up on Steam where, a piece, it doesn't say click here, it says touch this or whatever. Like, it's like very obviously still
boy, does that really still happen?
That really still happens. And that's something that I think is absolutely fair enough. Also pricing, like if a game is out on mobile at price X and then it comes out on PC and it's 5 times the price, and the only justification there is that, games are more expensive on PC. I think people kind of get riled by that as well. Those are games where I think there's lots of reasons that can work if the game has cool new stuff or is different on that platform in some way. But yeah, so I think that's, as long as you're not doing those things, I don't think anyone's going to hold it against you. I think if you make a game that feels right for PC, then people won't backlash. In terms of starting a studio, again, studio's an ethereal thing. So in terms of starting a company, you should do that right now. Like, I think if you're in the UK, it's about 30 quid, to, start a limited company. There's a lot of reasons to do it. Personal liability is the most important one in terms of just protecting yourself legally and the stuff you make. But also, it's a very easy thing to set up and it's going to be easier now. I ran into this with Thomas Was Alone, getting paid from Steam. And I think this has been eased up now because Steam's opened the doors a little bit. But back then, I had to get paid by Steam. I had to set up a lot of this business stuff. I'm pretty sure it's probably more easy now.
Get your tax ID. Get
all your tax. You're going to want to pay tax. You're going to have to do all that stuff. So
you're not going to want to pay tax. You're going to have to pay tax.
if you're a socialist like me, you're going to want to pay tax. If you're an evil capitalist pig like Alexander, then you're not going to want to. But those things need to kind of tick into place. So starting a company, yes, do that now. Get it all hooked up. You ideally, you'll want to be there. And to be honest, if you've released games and they've sold, you're probably already thinking about that for those reasons anyway, because you have to kind of organize how you pay the tax man for all this stuff and how you run things, and hiring people, stuff like that just is easier when you're a company. In terms of a studio, unless you're independently very wealthy, like physically getting an office and filling it with people, probably something to hold off on. If you're making apps, then you're a coder. You're someone who can get something out the door. Thomas Was Alone was something that I did on my own, basically. I got Danny in the studio for 3 hours to do voiceover and Dave made the music. But outside of that was all me because it was the game that I could make on my own. Rectangles is about that's not entirely fair on myself, but it's about where I felt comfortable selling a game. So do those kind of projects. Do projects that are small. If you have the money, by all means, jump in, make a studio. But I'm not the guy to give you advice there because you're already kind of in a different place. The other option is, as Alexander said, is the volume thing where we basically, it's a bunch of freelancers basically. I sat at home doing all the core stuff, and then I found collaborators, people I'd worked with before, people who were recommended, friends of friends, people I liked, whatever. And they would come in and they'd do a couple of months' work or a week's work, or in Andy Serkis's case, 2.5 hours work. And kind of they'd come in and do their little piece of the game and hand that to me, and it would all go in. But that didn't, I didn't have those as full-time employees, which, introduces a lot of issues in terms of paying people, PAYE, depending on where you are in the world, like paying for health insurance if you're in America, stuff like that. Like freelancing, in terms of the hourly rate, is a much higher number to account for that stuff. And it's a much cleaner kind of process if you're smaller, to just give someone more money and let them take, responsibility for all of their costs.
And when he says, he'd like to expand into PC and console games, I would also note that depending on the size of your team, you are going to do a PC game first, or maybe you'll get lucky and Sony will fund something for a console. But you are highly unlikely, or you are putting yourself in danger if you try to make a PC game and a console game at the same time, because there are different requirements for both, and it is difficult.
It's really tough. Like I've not seen many people manage to do it on their own. In fact, I would say that I don't think I've ever seen anyone do it. To be transparent and open here with us, Thomas Was Alone, I went to a publisher and they handled every port. If you've played Thomas Was Alone on anything other than a PC and Mac, I didn't make it. That's someone else's work. That's someone's done a port for me, in exchange for payment or percentage or all these different kinds of ways that people are remunerated. With Volume, because we had the budget to do so, we paid a company to do ports for us, Jaw, who's collaborated with us on a lot of Volume stuff. Even that, this is something I'm always very conscious of, and I always want to try, and I think this podcast does a good job, hopefully, of doing this, is I don't want people to think, well, Mike managed to launch his game on every platform, and people just imagine me sat at my desk with like an iPhone in one hand, a DualShock in another,
and just hitting the export button.
Exactly, yeah. And it's getting easier, and all the platform holders are working to make this stuff easier. But no, I think realistically, doing more than if you're doing a game and you're thinking of it across all platforms, mobile you already have the experience in, so that's probably not a problem. PC and Mac, very straightforward to get those games done. Console, yes, there's a lot of work in terms of the literal kind of technical stuff of getting it to run well on a console, but then a lot of kind of the processes that these platforms have in terms of making sure your game, TRCs and TCRs, depending on which platform holder you have, but like the rules about how big a button needs to be on screen, those kind of things that you're going to have to fiddle with. And then this enormous amount of like metadata and marketing material and synchronization of things. There's a lot of jobs that need to be done outside of just, does the game run at 60 FPS on a console? There's a lot of other jobs that I think it's very easy as a developer to get focused on the technical kind of, does this work? When actually there's a lot of other jobs around. So if you're thinking of that, honestly, yeah, I would follow Alexander's advice. Make a great PC game that works with a controller.
Yeah, don't get hung up on
it goes.
don't get hung up on being a quote weird mobile game developer that is all of a sudden making PC games. If you're going to make a PC game, make a PC game. Honestly, no one cares. No one cares that you're a mobile developer. They care about the game. If the game feels like a rushed port of a mobile game, they will absolutely react. But no one, unless your mobile game is incredibly well known, I don't think that's an issue. So if you have any burning questions about games, game development, or just about the complexities of the universe, you can send those questions to us via contact@BithellGames.com. That's CONTACT, Bithell Games, BITHELL Games.com. You can also leave comments on the YouTubes or on the Twitters by pinging at Mike Bithell, at Slowinski, that's SLIWINSKI, or at Volume Game. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bithell Games Podcast. We can always use your support, so please provide reviews, 5 stars on iTunes, likes, subscribes on YouTube, positive reinforcement on whatever other platforms you're hearing this show on whenever possible. This podcast was produced by Jonathan Downen. We will be back next week. I am Alexander Slawinski. Thanks again. Get in the last word, Mike.
Optical.